Says going live. All right, we are live. So joining me today is a super special guest, David Pitt. David, for those who don't know you, could you say something about who you are and what you do?
Well, I'm professor at California State University, Los Angeles. I'm also now chair of the department, and I work on philosophy of mind, philosophy of language, and metaphysics.
Chair of the department. I know this is a pox that's going around to several people that I know that
Yeah.
Getting yoked into being chair.
Well, yeah, people, when I tell people who are not in academia, they say congratulations. They do, no, condolences for an
Yeah,
order.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Someone in my department wants to do it. It's something you have to do because it's your turn.
Yeah, exactly.
Take a hit for the team. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. In Europe, it's actually kind of an honor or something. Over here, it just means a lot of work.
Yeah.
So you've been working a lot on the cognitive phenomenology, but also you have a background in linguistics. I know that you come from the Graduate Center at a time when there was a lot of linguistic philosophers around, Jerry Katz and other people of that nature. So I think it's really interesting the way that you're combining your work on cognitive phenomenology, but also with this kind of really nice background in linguistics. You also still do work in philosophy of linguistics, or is it mostly consciousness now for you?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I got invited to attend a conference, I think it was in the summer of 2015 in Braunschweig, Germany. That was kind of a conference in honor of Paul Postal. And he couldn't make it. He Skyped in, but he suggested to the organizer that I be invited. And it was a conference on philosophy of linguistics and realism in linguistics. And I thought, oh, well, yeah, I told her I got this paper that's kind of half written and some ideas about in philosophy of linguistics. And I gave that, and then it was subsequently published in the proceedings of that conference. It's called What Kind of Science is Linguistics?
What's the answer?
It depends. So what I wanted to challenge was the idea that Jerry Katz had, that if the objects of study of a discipline are abstract objects, then the discipline is automatically a formal discipline. And I argue that that's not right. And it depends on the kind of abstract objects you're studying. So for example, if you're a biologist, what you're interested in is species, types of animals, and those are arguably abstract objects. But your methodology isn't formal, it's empirical. And you're trying to determine the nature of the types that are instantiated in your environment. And so for me, the question of realism, conceptualism, and nominalism in linguistics is a methodological question and not an ontological question.
Interesting.
And so the question about linguistics is, well, what's the nature of, let's suppose you're studying abstract objects, sentence types, semantic types, sound types. What kinds of abstract objects are they? Do they have concrete tokens or not? And if they do, you can study them by studying their tokens. And if they don't, then that part of linguistics anyway is a formal science.
Right. What's the reason for thinking that a species is an abstract object as opposed to just like a concrete object that's extended, consisting of its members or something like that?
Well, you could think of it that way, but what my argument was is that even if you do think of them as abstract objects, it doesn't follow that linguistics is a formal science.
Yeah. Interesting. So, and do you find that background is useful for you in your work on the cognitive phenomenology and making these arguments, or is it too separate?
Well, sometimes it is. So, for example, there's a chapter in the book I'm trying to finish on indexical thought, and so some of the stuff I learned in linguistics is relevant there. I mean, I know where to go to get information to prevent myself something that linguistics linguists would dismiss out of hand. But more philosophy, the philosophy of language that I studied is more relevant to the work I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, there's a lot of philosophy of language in this stuff. I got a sneak peek at some of the book, and I think it's going to be a great book, by the way. The Quality of Thought. Is there a deadline or a due date that this should be coming out? Do we know?
Yeah, it was like 3 years ago. So I've got one chapter to finish, and then I'm going to send it in.
Okay.
But I work very slowly, partly because the writing is really, really important to me. The way things sound is really important. The way things flow is really important. And also, it can take me a while to figure out the answer to the question. So if you're going to go radically internalist about mental content, and you think linguistic content is derived from mental content, you have to say something about, well, Putnam and Burge and Kripke and Kaplan, and you have to work really hard to say something against those people.
Yeah.
So it took a long time to come up with the arguments. I remember once I went to Steve Schiffer when I was still in graduate school and said, talking about externalism, and I said, I just don't have these intuitions. And he said, well, that's fine, but what's your argument? I mean, what's wrong with the intuitions? And it took me 10 years, but I figured out, especially with Burge, because Burge is complex. I figured out what I thought was wrong with the thought experiment, and that's a whole chapter.
That's the arthritis stuff. I want to ask you about that.
Sure.
But before we get into that stuff, it's the way you set up. So the context of the book is in terms of doing what you call analytic phenomenology.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder if you could just say a little bit about how you interpret. What do you mean by that? I mean, I know kind of what your answer is, but I want to have you set it up for us.
Sure. People are using the term in different ways. Philip Goff uses it in his book on panpsychism in a completely different way. But what I mean is a study of experience on its own terms, the way traditional phenomenology. And I mean, you start with in traditional phenomenology, the bracketing of the relation between experience and the world. And one way to think of it, I've talked to my friends who are post-structural scholars, and some of them say, no, this wasn't his motivation. And some say, well, it was kind of his motivation. But you look at it as like, we get to Kant and we're really tired of trying to solve that problem, the appearance reality problem. So let's do something else. Let's forget about that aspect or that way of trying to explain experience, and just focus on experience itself. And my motivation was, I'm really tired of mind-body metaphysics and reduction, non-reduction. I'm a total agnostic about all that stuff. And so let's bracket the question of the relation of consciousness to the brain, and like traditional phenomenologists did, study experience on its own terms, but let's use analytic techniques to do it. And let's take the history of analytic philosophy of mind as our context. And so it's analytic both because it's based in a dissatisfaction with the way analytic philosophy of mind has gone, and also because it brings analytic values and technique to the problem. And there's I think this is what Charles Seward does. I think it's what Raya Kriegel does, what Angela Mendelevici does. It's the phenomenal intentionality stuff. They're doing phenomenology, but from an analytic perspective and informed by analytic work and the history of analytic philosophy of mind.
Yeah, and I really like that recent stuff of Uriah's that is in this vein, where you categorize like how many types of consciousness do we need to posit in order to account for, our mental lives. But it's interesting that you say you're agnostic about mind-body reduction or, functionalism, identity theory, dualism, because in the first chapter of your book, you come off kind of as being against reductionism, actually. I mean, is that, do you have, I mean, maybe I'm getting the wrong feeling from what I was reading, but it sounds like to me that you're very skeptical that there could be a successful reduction. And so
Yeah, I am, but that doesn't mean I believe that consciousness isn't physical. I mean, by successful reduction, I mean something that we would understand, something that I would understand. And so it's sort of McGinn-like, but I'm also not committed to Mysterianism. Or maybe he's right about that, or maybe we just haven't done enough work yet. Or so the dissatisfaction is mostly with what's been done so far. Yeah,
you have this memorable line where you say you wouldn't understand it even if God tweeted out the correct metaphysics.
Yeah, and maybe that's just me. Look, I don't understand special relativity either, but I assume it's because of my own cognitive shortcomings. But I don't think anybody in the world understands consciousness and how it arises from neural activity. My sort of pocket version of the mind-body problem is, well, we know that beyond any reasonable doubt that brain activity is producing consciousness, but that's impossible.
Yeah.
So sort of encapsulates bewilderment. And so my position is, I don't know. I mean, yeah, am I a dualist? I don't know. I don't want to play that game anymore.
Yeah. And it doesn't seem like it's really relevant for the kind of project that you're setting yourself, because you're like you're saying, doing phenomenology and whatever. I mean, I like this way that you phrase it. Whatever else is going on, we know consciousness is real. We have access to it, so we can kind of use our first person methodology to talk about it and to study it. And then all those other questions, they'll either be sorted out or not. But in the meantime, we have some other work that we can do. So I think it's a really cool way of framing the project.
Thanks. Yeah, when it's also mostly like, well, I don't know. And like I said, if God explained it to us, I wouldn't get it. Maybe I would. I don't know. But I don't want to play that game. I think Voter somewhere talks about it. It's been raining for weeks, and we're all so tired of doing metaphysics and sort of a Winnie the Pooh-esque thing. And that's kind of the way I feel too. And I really love the way that Ward put it in one of his papers. He talks about the tyrannizing anxieties and ambitions of mind-body metaphysics. And I don't want to, be stuck, trying to get the two ends of the magnets to come together, or to get out of the Chinese finger trap and just go round and round and round with those things. And I'm not satisfied with any of the purported or offered explanations that I've heard, but it's not like I've got one. So I think I'm really interested in consciousness, but I don't think that explaining how it arises from the brain or reducing it to brain activity or whatever is the only thing you can do in philosophy of mind. And for me, it's bored that I don't want to try to do that. Plus, I don't have any ideas, which makes it even more boring. So, and I'm suggesting, okay, so this is a different way to do it, and of course, not alone in this. And Charles Seward is very explicit about it.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's a breath of fresh air in philosophy of mind. I mean, I like those other kinds of traditional questions as well, but if that was all there was to the philosophy of mind, it would be a sad, boring place.
Well, there's certainly a lot to learn from all of them, and yeah, it's important. It's important to study that stuff, and I think it's also important to not shut out empirical investigation even if your basic methodology is introspective. I think experimental psychology can be a big help in adjudicating disputes, or providing techniques for indirectly studying other people's experience. Yeah,
because some of the things, there's a couple of places where you kind of say maybe this is an empirical issue. So I think some of that stuff's going to come up soon. I mean, so there's a couple of things. I think maybe would it be fair to say that you're kind of at this point best known for defending cognitive phenomenology, or at least that's a prominent part of your project?
Yeah. So I actually was the person who coined the term cognitive phenomenology.
I did
So
not know that.
yeah, Galen Strawson claims he used it in 1986, and he did, but I'm pretty sure it's because of my 2004 paper or else other people just thought of the same thing at the same time.
Oh, I thought you
I
were going to
don't like
say,
thinking.
sorry, I thought you were going to say it was because of your 2004 paper that Strawson said that in 88.
It was 86. No,
Yeah,
no, no,
86.
no. So, but I don't really like that term anymore because I've found that a lot of people think what I meant by cognitive, or what one means by cognitive, is sort of anything cognitive, beliefs and desires, but propositional attitudes, and any kind of cognitive process. And that's not what I meant at all. What I meant was the phenomenology of a current thought content. And so in my book, I use the term conceptual phenomenology or propositional phenomenology opposed to cognitive phenomenology, because I mean, I have views about belief and whether there's a phenomenology of belief. I tend to think there isn't, but that's not at all what I was intending in that 2004 paper.
Right. You're there. You're arguing for the claim that the conceptual contents of thought states are individuated by a distinctive kind of proprietary phenomenal feel, and that's not really
Well,
specific.
go ahead.
Sorry, go
Sorry,
ahead.
you
Oh
kind
no.
of paused. You froze for a minute there on my
Oh,
screen.
I was just going to say that there you're not. It wasn't specific to any certain kind of state, but it was focused on the content.
Right. So the contents of our current conscious thoughts.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, can you say a little bit about what you mean by these contents being individuated by this kind of phenomenal consciousness?
Well, I've changed my mind since the 2004 paper about the right thing to say.
Okay.
And what I want to say now is that they are identical to certain phenomenal types, conceptual phenomenal types. So when I wrote that paper, I was, coming out of having studied a lot with Jerry Fodor in philosophy of mind, and the sort of Dreskin project of explaining how it is that something in the head expresses this abstract mind and language independent proposition. And I think there's problems with Dresky's view, and I think there's problems with conceptual role views or inferential role views. And I was thinking, all right, what else could one appeal to that's in the head, by way of explaining how it is that some state of your head expresses a mind and language independent proposition. And I thought, well, maybe it's some kind of phenomenology. And when I first entertained the idea of there being what it's like to thinking, I thought it was ridiculous. Or walking down a street in New York and thinking to myself, is there something it's like to think that today is Tuesday? But no, that's just dumb. But then a while later, I was lying in my bed thinking about this stuff, and it occurred to me that I knew what I was thinking in this really direct way. I wasn't inferring what I was thinking from my behavior or from what I said. I just knew what I was thinking, or at least that sometimes that's possible. And that was the basis for the argument in that paper.
Right.
It was, well, unless the contents of your thoughts were readily apparent in consciousness, you wouldn't be able to identify them and individuate them in this immediate introspective sort of way. And I worked on that paper for a long time, and my views were evolving as I was writing it. And I got to the edge of the view that I currently have, but which I didn't put together and publish work until 2009, that actually that argument supports the conclusion that what it's like of thinking is the content, is the thought content. So instead of there being a phenomenal type that expresses a proposition, or you can think of it as a relation between abstract objects, thought contents are experiential types. So when we talk about the content of a sensory experience, it might be painful, right? We don't say that phenomenology represents pain. It
Right.
is pain, right? And the token of a certain pain type. And so I realized that the argument supported the idea that, well, yeah, this cognitive or conceptual phenomenology doesn't express propositions. It instantiates them, or tokens them rather. So there's phenomenal, just like there are sensory phenomenal types, and what it is to have an experience with that phenomenal content is to token that type. The same is true with thoughts and thought.
Yeah, so there's one thing that, I mean, there's a couple things that puzzle me about this. I mean, I'm a believer in this kind of, well, a version of it anyway. I don't know if it's exactly the same as the kind of you're going to defend, because I mean, this is getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but you want to, I think you're tempted to say that you can have these things unconsciously, and yet there's still something that it's like to have them. So maybe this is a kind of overflow, or in Bloch's sense.
Yeah. So that's chapter 6.
That's how just
I mean, when I started putting together an argument for this, and I still didn't know that other people had the view, hadn't read enough. But one of the first things that really worried me was, oh, well, okay, what about unconscious thoughts?
Right.
Right. So we learned from Freud that, maybe most of the mind is unconscious. We have unconscious beliefs and desires, and they have intentional contents. And so if I'm saying that intentional contents are phenomenal, then in order for there to be unconscious thoughts, there would have to be unconscious phenomenology. Oh, but no one believes that. Well, almost no one. M. Coleman says, "What's the problem?"
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I don't think it's conceptually incoherent, but it's something that most philosophers think is impossible. So I thought, well, I better find some way to deal with that. And so what I did was I tried to come up with some arguments for unconscious phenomenology. So I started with blind sight cases, but quickly discovered when I gave talks that there's a very persistent objection to that sort of thing, saying that, well, you can tell what color is, but you're not having conscious experience of it, so you must be having unconscious experience of it. Well, not necessarily. Maybe your cognitive mind is just whispering to you, it's green. You're not having any unconscious phenomenal experience.
Right.
And then I tried another argument that's fairly complicated. I won't go into it now, about phenomenal sorites, maybe being an argument for unconscious phenomenology. And then I tried this other thing where I tried to develop an idea of states which are conscious in themselves, but I'm not conscious of, but which are nonetheless mine in some robust sense. So basic idea there is just like a conscious state of yours, that we were hooked up in the right sort of way, neurologically, technologically, conscious thoughts that you have might start to influence my behavior. So that in order to explain my behavior, why my body is doing what it's doing, we have to refer to conscious states of yours, which I'm not conscious of. And I thought, well, then, so what if we took your brain and smashed it into my skull with my brain, with the same kind of hookup between them? Well, and I think there's a little bit more reason to think that those conscious states that I'm not aware of are mine. I mean, the basic reason being they're mine in a sort of functional sense. You want to explain my behavior, you have to refer to them. So they're in that kind of sense mine. But I'm not conscious of them. And I thought, well, if a whole brain, why not half a brain or part of a brain? So maybe there are conscious states occurring in my brain that are influencing my behavior that I'm not aware of, but they're conscious in themselves. And that's pretty weird. And maybe that entails that there are all these momentary selves. Every time there's one of these unconscious thoughts, I thought, yeah, maybe that's not a good idea. I mean, I couldn't find a conclusive argument for that point of view. And then in the chapter, I consider views that that are all basically committed to the idea that there's derived intentionality, and unconscious states have derived intentionality. But I think if you're serious about conceptual phenomenology, then you ought to think there can't be derived content, because there can't be derived phenomenology. Right? You can't say you treat it as if it had phenomenology, but it doesn't. Well, if it doesn't, then it doesn't have content. So I don't think that's a good way to address the question. And then finally, I thought, well, do we really need unconscious content? Maybe just unconscious syntactic states that are programmed in the right way will do. So the content is only genuine intentional content, mental content is only present in the conscious moment, as Galen would put it. But there's all kinds of stuff going on in the brain that's subserving transitions between these states that is not itself conscious or contentful. And that's the view I've been trying to live with for a couple of years now. But I think it's, yeah, this is a really, I mean, the simplest solution is to say, yeah, there's unconscious phenomenology. Problem. But given that,
I guess I'm one of these people that's kind of skeptical. I mean, I have my days where I'm less skeptical, but I mean, I think about this more in terms of like sensory contents and perceptual phenomenology. But I mean, I know you have this phrase in the book where you say, well, there's unconscious consciousness. And that some people say, well, that's like on the borderline of sounding like something which is a bit strange.
Well, that was, of course, deliberately chosen.
Yeah, I know.
Value. But that's the case where there's states of my brain that are figuring in the etiology of my behavior, that are conscious in themselves, but that I'm not conscious of.
Right.
Right. Conscious in themselves, but not for me. That's the unconscious.
Yeah. So that's the. I mean, I don't want to go too far down this because I think it's really hard. I think this ultimately an empirical issue. It's really hard to make sense of, but for someone like me, it's really hard to understand what it would mean to say it's conscious, but I'm not aware of it in some sense, or I'm incomplete. There's no sense in which I'm aware that it's occurring. I just think that's, yeah. In what sense is it phenomenal then? Phenomenal.
Well, think about split brain cases.
Yeah.
Right. Isn't there some evidence that you have like two centers of consciousness when your brain is split? Right.
Well,
so,
I think that's pretty debatable, actually. I mean, I hang out with people who tend to say that the one side of the brain is an unconscious processor, and the side of the brain that's conscious is the one that's talking to you. So, and there's a whole big conference on this at NYU, and so there was people arguing for it, against it, and people arguing in the middle. But I think these kinds of cases all run up against the same problem, which is that, well, even if we can make sense of it conceptually, it's hard to know what would count actually as evidence for it. Because if you can do a certain behavior, like so if the right side of the brain can point.
Aren't there experiments that seem to show that the left brain doesn't know what the right brain is, your left half doesn't know what the right half is doing, and vice versa?
Right. Yeah.
And so when I was thinking about that, I said, okay, so if we've effectively cut our consciousness in half, so let's say the left, they're both independently conscious. So the left hemisphere is unaware of conscious states of the right hemisphere, which are nonetheless states of me, at least in the sense that they might be influencing or causing my behavior. And so then I thought, well, if half a brain, then why not a quarter, or maybe a smaller piece?
Right.
But that, of course, that argument relies on the idea that when you split a brain, you split a consciousness. And
right, and that was the thing I was trying to get at, was it's not clear what would count as evidence that the right part of the brain was conscious. It can't say it is, and it can do various things, but there's also some evidence that maybe those things can be done non-consciously. Mm-hmm. So the fact that it's pointing or answering questions isn't all by itself really, I would say, strong evidence that there's a center of consciousness there. But I think you're right, it's conceptually possible at least. But I
Or
just think
think
it's
of the
interesting.
case where you've got two brains stuffed in the same skull.
Right.
Right. So in my thought experiment, the other person is Penelope. She's connected to me, and then her brain is inserted in my skull, and she's still having the same influence on my behavior she was before, and her states are conscious in themselves, but I'm not directly aware of them.
Right. So, but I
Um,
would say Penelope must be, in some sense.
what, unconscious?
No, that she must be aware of the states.
Oh yeah, she is.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
but
that's
I'm
why they're
not.
conscious. Yeah, but that's why they're conscious.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, maybe I wasn't clear. I'm saying that here's a way to accept that if a state has phenomenology, it has to be conscious, right? But also try to make sense of the idea that a state like that is I'm not directly aware of it. But so I started out by thinking, are there conscious? I was driving back for a conference where Lynn Stevens sort of shot down the whole blindside argument, and I was thinking, oh, okay, well, what else could we do? And I thought, well, are there conscious states that I'm not directly aware of? Well, yeah, there's plenty. Other people's, right?
Right.
Okay, so is there any sense in which one of those states might be mine without my being directly aware of it? And that's when I had this sort of idea that, well, I mean, it could be mine in the sense that we have to refer to it to explain my behavior, right? And oh, but it's a separate person. All right, now put her brain in my skull with mine, still a separate person, not a separate body. Maybe that makes it easier to accept the idea that those states of that brain are, in at least the functional sense, mine.
Right.
Right. So they would be conscious in themselves, and Penelope would be aware of them. So in that sense, they're hers and not mine. I'm not aware of them. But in this other more functional sense, they are mine. And I thought,
Yeah.
okay, well, if a whole brain, then why not half a brain? Or why not half of my brain? Or why not a smaller part of my brain? Now, if you need, in fact, have a whole brain in order to have conscious experience, then yeah, the thought experiment stops with Penelope's brain in my head.
Yeah. I mean, I like the argument. I see where you're going with it, but so I think it's the sense of mind that you're trading on here that I would be a little bit suspicious of, because yeah, I can see that clearly these states are yours in the sense of functionally, they're playing a role in producing your behavior, but they are not yours in the sense of your conscious states, because you don't have any access to them, you don't know about them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So
if you think about what, the Freudian unconscious, right? So Freud says that you have all of these nasty beliefs and desires about your parents, and you say, no, I don't. Wouldn't I know if I wanted to do these horrible things?
yeah, exactly.
And he said, he says, no. Well, what makes you think I have these beliefs? Now you have to sort of buy into a lot of other stuff, but I think his essential answer is it's the best explanation of your behavior.
Right. Although
Why you don't really want to wash your hands every 5 minutes, except maybe now you do these days, but
yeah,
what
right.
you really want to do is kill one parent, marry the other, but that's unacceptable, so you repress it. But so Freud is saying, look, these are your beliefs, and in what sense are they the patient's beliefs? They're driving the patient's behavior, even though the patient is completely unaware of them. So they are not mine in that direct sense.
Right.
And that was
I
the distinction I was playing on in this argument.
Yeah, no, and I like that. But for Freud, he denied that there were unconscious perceptions in that sense, and so the kinds of
But he
states
certainly
that
thought there were unconscious beliefs and desires.
Yeah, but not in the sense that you were talking about, where they're a kind of phenomenal associated with a phenomenal feel.
Right. But what I was taking from Freud was the idea that of ownership, right? It is
Right.
a mental state of yours, even though you're not aware of it.
Right.
Right. And it's a mental state that is belief-like, right? That has that kind of content, even though you're not aware of it. Well, what makes you say it's mine? Well, it explains your behavior, it's causing your behavior. That's the part I was taking from Freud.
I see. Okay.
And
Yeah,
so
I like that.
Yeah, and so it's not an argument that there's unconscious phenomenology. On this argument, all phenomenology is conscious, just not all of my phenomenology. My phenomenology is conscious to me, and that's where this functional sort of weaker sense of ownership comes in to justify saying that these states are nonetheless mine.
Yeah. I think this connects up in an interesting way with some other another argument of yours, which has to do with your acquaintance knowing argument, that there's a sense in which just having the conscious experience, you're acquainted with it, and it's not knowledge by acquaintance. And I want to ask you about that distinction in a second, but the distinction between acquaintance knowing and knowing by acquaintance. But it seems to me like maybe there's a bit of, I don't want to say tension, but maybe something like tension here with what we're talking about right now, because on the one hand, by being a state of yours, you should know what it's like by being acquainted with it. But clearly in this Penelope case, you aren't acquainted with those states, are you? Or are you going to say that you know what it's like in this case?
No,
To have these
she
states
does,
that you're, yeah.
but I don't.
Okay. So, but I thought there was a stronger claim. Maybe I'm misreading too much into this because of my own biases, but I thought there was a stronger claim in the acquaintance knowing stuff, that was part of what it meant for it to be your conscious state, was that you have it,
Well,
you thereby know what it's like.
Right. That wasn't part of that argument, but in the primary sense of what we might call a primary sense of its being a conscious state, being a state of mind, typically what we mean is that I'm conscious of it. That's what makes it mine. It's in my consciousness.
Right.
But what I was suggesting is that there's a sort of etiolated sense of mind that we might still assign to states that I'm not aware of. Like we say, there's certain states of my brain, which are not personal states, not states of me, that are unconscious, that are doing things. And what makes them mine? Well, they're in my brain and they're doing things. What makes it a belief or desire? Well, they're doing the things that beliefs and desires do. And so this is a way of saying, yeah, okay, let's accept that there can't be any unconscious phenomenology, that any phenomenal state, any state with phenomenal character must be conscious. Okay, so then the question is, could such a state be mine if I'm not aware of it? Well, it couldn't belong to anybody if no one was aware of it, though I think Sam Coleman would disagree.
Right.
And I don't have any arguments for it, but I think he's probably right about that. But I didn't want to go there because I didn't really have I thought, a good way to defend it. So it's not mine in the sense that I'm not directly aware of it, but it can nonetheless be truthfully attributed to me, and it's conscious in itself, because it has to be if it's going to have phenomenology.
Right.
It's not part of my conscious experience, but part of someone else's conscious experience. So that's what you start with, right? Are there conscious states that I'm unaware of, directly unaware of? And yeah, sure, yours, for example. Okay, well, but they're not mine, they're yours. And then the question is, well, is there any sense in which we would, or any scenario in which we would want to say that they are, in a sense, yours, even though you're not aware of them? And that would be the Freudian, they're driving your behavior sense, and they're coming from inside you.
Exactly. But so if you take Penelope out of it, so suppose you buy the line of argument to the conclusion that Penelope states, once her brain is in yours, those states are count as yours in some sense. So suppose you buy that and you say, well, okay, so it's happening to you right now, and you have a regular brain. I mean, a philosopher's brain, as much as a philosopher has a regular brain, you have one of those. So it's not squashed or molded or melded or anything like that. So suppose there's some of this phenomenology that you're not aware of or isn't phenomenal to you occurring. So who's acquainted with it in that case? There's multiple selves.
Okay, well that's so if consciousness requires a self, then there are these, I mean, Penelope would be a lasting, permanent self lodged in your skull.
Right.
If we get to the point where you know, we want to say, okay, well, if split brain cases, well, maybe half of my brain can be, how much brain does it take to be conscious? And if consciousness involves a self, how much brain does it take to have a self? Well, maybe it doesn't take even half a brain. Maybe it takes, you know, just who knows, right? These are empirical questions. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. All right, can you ask the question again? Then I'll
Yes.
recover it.
Well, I was just going to say, in the normal case, the neurotypical case, if there's things like this occurring, then who's acquainted with the conscious
Yeah,
experience?
good. Thanks. So maybe every time there's one of these things, a little self pops into existence. And so all my unconscious thoughts are someone else's. Who? Well, maybe these are just temporary selves. If you think that consciousness requires a self, you know, some self for whom it's conscious, then this view would entail that, yeah, there are all these momentary, maybe permanent, maybe there's like a, you know, completely isolated, cordoned off part of my brain where all the nasty conscious thoughts live that I have, you know, pushed out of my conscious mind, you know, like a Freudian id, where all the nasty stuff is, and is conscious in itself, but not for me. Or maybe there's just momentary things. And one of the reasons I didn't want to, one of the reasons I looked for other ways to try to handle unconscious thought is that seems pretty weird.
Yeah, it's pretty weird. I mean, it may be true, but it's a bit strange.
Yeah, it's a bit strange. And I thought, well, okay, I'm a philosopher. I'm allowed to be strange.
Exactly.
Ideas. And so that's one of the reasons I didn't, you know, say this is my considered view. This is the answer to the unconscious content challenge to conceptual phenomenology. But you know, it occurred to me, and I thought, well, this is worth working out. It's kind of fun and interesting, and who knows? Maybe it's true.
Yeah, it's an interesting view. Do you think on your view, does acquaintance knowing require a self, or can that occur in some non-selfy way? Or so I'm confused about the relation of the self to the acquaintance.
Yeah, I would say it requires a self, though I reserve my right to change my mind. But
so sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so yeah, that was the answer.
Okay. So would you say you split your credence, or however you want to put it, between this kind of, there's multiple selves with their own phenomenologies versus a kind of what I interpret as a pseudo Denetian, you know, there are events of content fixation, but they're not conscious in any sense, just merely syntactic things with no content or something like that under the hood.
Yeah, I don't know about content fixation, but so
subpersonal states, in other words.
Yeah, that don't have content.
Yeah.
But nonetheless result in conscious states that have content. How does that work? Well, there you go with the mind-body problem again. We don't know how that happens.
Well, I have a more basic question though, which is how can they have their causal effect without content? What are they doing? You said something about maybe
they're physical states. They're physical states. So just like you could, you know, Turing explain this to the world, how you can make a machine that's going to give you the output you want, given the input you want, and it doesn't have to be thinking. It just has to be producing results that we interpret. But imagine something like that, whose, you know, inputs and outputs are conscious states. Processing is unconscious and purely syntactic, but the machine is engineered so that you get the answer that you think logic dictates. And so, okay, who programmed the brain? Well, evolution. Maybe we do it all the time when we learn.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at the end of the chapter, I say, well, yeah, I don't know. I don't have a definitive answer. Maybe all of these things are true. Maybe there are some states that are unconscious and have phenomenology. Maybe there are some Penelope-like states. And maybe there's this other stuff. Maybe all of this is part of an answer to what should someone like me say about unconscious thought.
Right. I guess my question is, why would it be wrong to say that those Turing type states have content? I mean, unless you want to just reserve the term content for phenomenal states, which I know you have a strong tendency to want to do that, but why?
Well, it's not a
tendency.
It's not just a tendency; it's a commitment.
Okay, well, you're very committed to that.
You commit me to this.
What would be wrong with saying that these states have content? Or maybe, that's why I brought the Dennett point up, because you could kind of take like an intentional stance or say the best I mean, it's just useful to talk about these states as carrying content. Like this state is carrying content about the apple over there, and it's guiding your hand, even though it's like, unconscious or something like that. But it would seem sort of like natural to posit, I don't want to use the word derived content, but some other kind of sense of content that these states carry information or something like that.
Right. So yeah, you can do that, but the question is, does it actually have content? Right. And if you think that content is an experiential thing and there can't be unconscious experiences, then I think you're forced to say, no, they don't. And there could just like there can't be derived pain, there can't be derived intentional content because it's experiential. That's part of the commitment of the view, at least the way I develop it, which is kind of like, let's see how far out on a limb we can go with this stuff, see what happens.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting, because the kind of like cognitive phenomenology or conceptual phenomenology that I have explored and thought about allows that these states can be unconscious, and they just also occur consciously. And when they're conscious, they have a phenomenology, but when they're unconscious, they don't. They have these other properties that you can call, whatever you want, but they're not phenomenal until they're conscious. But it's the same state that occurs both consciously and unconsciously.
Right, but if you think that content itself is phenomenological, and you think that phenomenology and consciousness are welded together,
right,
then you can't, since you can't have phenomenology without consciousness, you can't have content without consciousness, because content is
right. So what would be the argument? What's the argument for the claim that you can only have content or consciously?
Because you can only have phenomenal experience consciously. So it's a hypothetical argument, right? Suppose you think that suppose you believe both that phenomenal content is that intentional content is phenomenal. Then either, let me start again. Suppose you think that you believe in the phenomenal intentionality of thought thesis, which acronyms nicely, and it's a term I owe to you when we were in Las Vegas. I've used it a lot. Thank you. So you buy into this. Well, then if you believe that, then either you have to believe that there's unconscious phenomenology because you think there's unconscious thought, or you have to say there is no unconscious thought because you think that there can't be unconscious phenomenology, and since thought contents are phenomenally constituted, if no unconscious state could have those properties, no unconscious state could have intentional content.
Right. Yeah, no, I understand that part of it, but I'm just asking for the prior step, the argument for the prior step. So why should we think that intentional contents are necessarily phenomenal, as opposed to just that they're phenomenal when they're conscious?
So yeah, that's the original argument in my 2004 paper that because we can tell what we're thinking, we can identify and individuate thoughts by their contents, consciously, introspectively, and non-inferentially. We can say, oh, we can non-inferentially determine, but that's a thought, that's not a thought, and this thought is different from that thought. right? When identify and individuate them by their content, then their content must be apparent to us in experience. And here's an unargued assumption. Um, sorry, maybe that's the right place for that unargued assumption. So it must be apparent to you in experience, and the only way things can be apparent to you in experience is if they're phenomenal.
Right. But that argument doesn't.
That's the argument. That's the unargued for assumption, which it seems to me to be clear and distinct idea.
Yeah, and I agree with that, but it doesn't. That argument, as far as, unless I misunderstand it, which is possible, but it doesn't seem to me to differentiate between the two kinds of theses that we're talking about here. So the one claim is that there are intentional contents which can occur unconsciously, but with no phenomenology. And then when those states occur consciously, there's some conceptual phenomenology that's occurrent at that point because it's a conscious state. And then you can tell what you're thinking. But it's really, and so the same story could be told on the kind of view that you have. So I don't really see that as differentiating or giving me a reason to prefer one over the other, because both of us are going to agree that you can tell by introspection what you're thinking when you have a conscious thought.
Right. So,
but you can't tell what you're thinking when it's unconscious.
If you're coming from the place in logical space that I'm coming from, say that there can be that unconscious states can have intentional content, is to say that there can be unconscious qualitative experience. Right. So I say, you either have to go that way, if you want unconscious thought, or if you don't think phenomenology can be unconscious, then you have to deny that there is unconscious thought.
So why can't you? So, I'm thinking of a view like similar. I mean, I've argued for this before, but no one cares about that. But so this is more closely associated with like the type of view that David Rosenthal has defended, not about thoughts, because he's a skeptic about cognitive or conceptual phenomenology, but in terms of sensory states, that you can have an unconscious pain, and when the pain's unconscious, there's nothing that it's like for you to have the pain, but it's still qualitative. It's still got some property which distinguishes it from sounds and from colors and plays a role, but there's no what it's like bit until that state occurs consciously. And then that's an extra property associated with the state. But it's still okay to call it a qualitative state when it's unconscious. It's just that you have to be careful to specify that there's nothing that it's like for you to have it.
Okay, so yeah, I did have David in the back of my mind when I was doing this stuff, because I remember in the course in graduate school, he was talking about the headache that you have all day, but you don't feel. And he was saying, it's there, you're just not feeling it. And I was thinking, no, it ceased to exist, and then it came to exist again. So, when I go back and forth on these things, but I definitely had his kind of examples in mind when I was thinking about this stuff. But so the distinction here is between there being something that it's like and there being something that it's like for me. Right. And so that sounds to me like you're making a distinction between phenomenology and consciousness of phenomenology, which I think means that you are making a distinction between conscious phenomenology and unconscious phenomenology. I didn't just repeat myself.
but so if you aren't making that distinction, you could be making a separate distinction, which is that these states have some properties, which we would call qualitative because they play a certain role or have a certain function in the mind. And then when those states are conscious, they come to have a phenomenal property, or there comes to be a what it's like. But before that, there was not what it's like. There was nothing that it was like, except in some very, very thin sense. And I know the paper you're talking about, that where David says that makes that distinction, but I don't think that has stuck in his thinking, and certainly not the way I'm thinking about these things. But there's just a state there that has a certain content, but is unconscious in every sense of the word unconscious. There's nothing that it's like in any sense for that state to be present.
So so the unconscious pain, the unconscious headache, does it have pain phenomenology?
No.
then it's not a pain.
Yeah, but why not? It plays all the same roles. You're going to limp when it's there, and you're going to favor.
Okay, so yeah, something you said earlier about these phenomenal properties being determined by functional role. I don't. I think functional role is determined by content of phenomenology. It's not the other way around.
Yeah, but it's not that the phenomenal content is determined by the functional role. It's that when that state is conscious, there's a phenomenology, and when it's unconscious, there isn't.
Okay, so if you think that content is phenomenological, then you have to say when they are conscious, there is content, and when they're not conscious, there isn't content.
Right, but that's why I was asking what the reason is for thinking that the content has to be phenomenological. Besides,
that's the
saying
basic.
that you can tell what you think, because that's
right,
the common between us.
I have another argument for it as well about how conscious states are individuated from a metaphysical point of view. And the argument there is that to be conscious is to be conscious in some way or other, and the ways of being conscious are just, roughly speaking, phenomenal properties. And so what distinguishes conscious state, what distinguishes distinct conscious states in themselves, not about how we identify them, what makes them different is their phenomenology. So there's a kind of phenomenology that's characteristic of conscious auditory experiences, different one for visual experiences, etc. And so if there are conscious thoughts, and conscious thoughts are not reducible to any of these other kinds of conscious states, then they ought to have their own special kind of phenomenology that makes them different from all these other states. Like phenomenology of an auditory state is what makes it different. One of the things that makes it different from a visual state, different kind of phenomenology. So if conscious thoughts are their own kind of thing, not reducible to anything else, then they have to have their own kind of phenomenology.
Right, and I agree. When they're conscious, they have to have that, but when they're unconscious, they don't.
Right. So I would say what I'm committed to, right, what my view is committed to, is saying that when they don't have that kind of phenomenology, if we're talking about thoughts, those states don't have content, don't have intentional content.
Yeah. So
Just
I
like
mean, I'll have to think about it more, but it's an interesting debate. But I mean, we spent already a lot of time on this, and then I have a bunch of other stuff I want to harangue you about. So maybe we'll just put a pin on this and come back to it.
Yeah, I think we're coming from very different places.
Yeah.
And Uriah Kriegel once said to me, he said, I think not everybody appreciates how radical this view is. I said, well, I don't know how radical it is, but it certainly goes against a lot of ways of thinking. Yeah, I think I have a footnote in one of my papers saying my professors will be very disappointed in me. I didn't learn the lessons they taught me in graduate school. But I did learn them. I just thought, yeah, you guys are wrong.
Yeah, well, that's why I was asking for the argument, because I get that we're coming from very different places, but I was wondering what's going to convince me to go on to your side. But I wanted to ask about something about this acquaintance knowing stuff. And I want to get you to talk a little bit about it, because I think it's really interesting and I like the idea. But also I want to ask you about, in respect to conceptual phenomenology as you understand it, if it doesn't put a little bit of pressure on your view that there are people who deny that they have cognitive phenomenology or a conceptual phenomenology, given your views about what it is to be a conscious state and an acquaintance. So I wonder if you could say something about those things.
Right. So from the very beginning, that was my other big worry about this view. And Galen talks about it a lot in his book, Mental Reality.
Right.
And I'm still working on this. I don't know that I have a settled view. I got a couple of ways of thinking about it. It's part of the book that I'm still working on. But I think, that's what I call the Humean objection. Okay. Right. So Hume says, well, when I cast around in my mind, I find, thoughts and feelings and ideas or whatever, but no self. So I don't encounter it. So why should I believe it exists? And I have friends and I've had students who are willing to take this idea very seriously. But then they said, well, I can't find it. Right. So that I believe that that's an honest intuition, that these aren't people arguing from their own theories. That needs to be explained. That's another big challenge for the view. And I'm still working on that. But I think part of it might be that we're actually really good at talking, but maybe we're not so good at thinking. So maybe this cognitive phenomenology is really kind of faint. So it would be like the vision of a Gila monster, right? It's there, but they never really notice it. Yeah, but what about when you try to find it? Well, maybe there's some problem analogous to, the very thing you're looking for is what you're using to look for it. So you're already looking past what I'm asking you to be aware of. You're thinking about things and you're looking, so to speak, in your mind. I don't have a inner perception view of introspection, but it's like, you're looking for your flashlight with your flashlight, and you'd say, there are no flashlights, I can't find it. Well, it's in your hand, dude. So, but I'm still really unsettled about that.
Okay. Yeah, because this is so part of the commitment there would be that introspection is itself cognitive, which is why we miss it, because we don't seem to miss it in the case of perceptual phenomenology.
Right. So we don't go introspectively searching for, deliberately searching for perceptual phenomenology with perceptual phenomenology. We do it with thought and attention.
Right.
Right. And so we're not looking for what we're looking for using the thing we're looking for, which might make it easy to not see what we're looking for. And I also think that, along with the idea that we're really not all that great at thinking, and that there are other possible creatures whose cognitive phenomenology is much more, term that Charles Seward and I came up with, pugilistic, right? Just smacks you in the face like pain. There might be creatures for whom the cognitive phenomena or the conceptual phenomenology burned way up. And it doesn't help that for us, for many of us, there are notable exceptions. I know in my own case, we talk to ourselves when we think. Jody Uzuni, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Jody says he doesn't. And Ruth Marcus said she didn't subvocalize. And Jody realized at one point that lack of subvocalization might have something to do with the fact that people didn't think his poetry was very good. I said, yeah, Jody, it's all about the sound of the word. You got to hear them. That's part of what poetry is. But I know that in my own case, I'm always chattering away at myself, and that kind of phenomenology is much more vivid, and it might be disguising. But I still have to finish working this out, and it's an important challenge.
I wonder if you could, because there's a related kind of, possibly I want to get your reaction to this. There's a related kind of thing in perceptual phenomenology known recently coming under the title of aphantasia, where there are people who deny that they are strong mental imagers. Like, for instance, I myself am a person that's not I have auditory imagery and I can hear things
in your head
without this, in my head, but you asked me to visualize something, I can't do it. Like people say, in fact, when I got to graduate school, I thought people were lying when they said they could picture the speckled hen, and I was like, I think speckled hen or something like that. I can't picture it.
Well, speckled hens are notoriously difficult to visualize.
Yeah, well, exactly. But even things like
nicely.
tornadoes or red squares, for me, it's I can't do it. So it turns out that we've recently sort of been finding out that this is a phenomenon, that there are certain subclass of persons who aren't strong visualizers. They don't have this kind of imagery. And so I wonder if you think, is it maybe a possibility that there could be something like aphantasia going on with cognitive phenomenology, that some people simply aren't good. They don't have that ability for whatever reason.
Then I would say that, that's a really interesting idea. And I would say, well, then that means they can't think.
Right, because, yeah.
And that would explain, a lot of people in positions of power right now. They're talking and talking and talking, but it doesn't appear that they're thinking, or at least not thinking well.
Right.
But yeah,
Exactly.
that's an interesting idea. But I do think that there's, I mean, to sort of develop one of the responses, it's too close to us, right? So look, if you know in this immediate non-inferential way what you're thinking, and its content has to be available to you in your conscious experience. And it's not just words, right? Because you can hear words in your head without thinking what they mean or knowing what they mean. One of my favorite examples is my colleague Mark Balaguer taught his daughter when she was 4 years old to say, he said, look, if anyone ever asks you where you live, tell them you live in the causal nexus. We do that. She didn't know what a causal nexus was.
Yeah.
Was she thinking that she lived in the causal nexus? No, she doesn't know what the causal nexus is. She's just running the words through her head. And that's not thinking. You have to understand the words, right? And that's, I want to argue, is a kind of experience. Galen calls understanding experience.
Yeah, and I was going to add, that's interesting you brought that up, because I was curious about your position on that, because it seems like you want to focus more on like current thoughts, whereas people like Strawson and Seward, as far as I understand them, and Searle too, back in the days when he talked about this, they talk about these kind of processes, like coming to understand, actively recalling a memory, and those seem like kind of different to me. One is an occurrent thing, and the other.
Yeah, but the occurrent thoughts occur at some point, right? And a process of thinking can involve a series of thoughts occurring. So I think that the phenomenology of of engaging in in thinking is going to be determined in large part by the phenomenology of the thoughts you're thinking.
Right.
So the phenomenology of a cognitive, personal level cognitive process presupposes the existence of conceptual phenomenology.
Do you gonna go the same route for things like attention? Is there a phenomenology of attending, or are you going to draw the line at that?
I don't know. I have enormous respect for Uriah and Terry Organ, but I think they went too fast. It's like, hold on, so now it's like everything is phenomenal.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, maybe, but we have to be careful. And my Husserl friends, when I tell them I have this argument that there's something it's like to think, they say, you need an argument for that. Why are you wasting your time? I said, well, it's, where I come from, you need an argument for these things, because it's very much against the mainstream. And I think that we shouldn't go too fast in claiming that there's a phenomenology of everything. We should think about it, maybe try to have some arguments for it. So yeah, I'm just focusing on the phenomenology of an occurrent conscious thought.
Yeah, it's a good place. I see it's a good cautionary principle that we don't want to.
Is there a phenomenology of belief? Well, there's certainly a phenomenology of affirmation. But as Freud taught us, you can affirm things that you don't really believe.
Right.
So I'm more inclined to say that belief is a functional property. Being a belief is a functional property. So, and people have said, oh yeah, you believe that there's a phenomenology of believing the P, and I say, no, it's not. I never said that.
Well,
I think
I know
actually, when I think
people,
about it, I think there probably isn't.
A lot of people conflate, I think, the word thinking with believing. So when you say
even Uriah did at one point.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not what this is about. And I think entertaining is not a propositional attitude, in the sense that you can entertain a thought, hold it in your mind without having any take on its truth value or anything else, or any
There's
emotion.
Still something that it's like to do that.
Yeah, it's just entertaining the thought.
Exactly.
It doesn't have an attitudinal component. Sorry?
I think this is going to answer my next question, because I mean, one of the things that I was led to this in a different kind of way. I got started by thinking about some things that schizophrenics say, and sometimes they say like they have these delusional beliefs, but they don't really believe them, but they do believe them, but they don't. Like they feel different than their regular beliefs, so to speak. You know, they don't act on them in the same way. You know, sometimes in worst case scenarios, sometimes they do, but often. So I was thinking about that. And so it seems to me like the same sort of argument that you give can be given for the attitudinal component. And that's something I've always been very interested in. Like I can tell whether I'm wondering or doubting something. I can also tell what I can tell whether I'm wondering or doubting something by introspectively, it seems to me. And they seem different experientially. And also I think I can tell what it is that I'm wondering or doubting, but you know, I can wonder whether, you know, JFK is north of Queens. I can doubt that JFK is north of Queens. So if the same argument that you gave seems to me to work pretty well there as well. If I can know that I'm wondering as opposed to doubting some content, then shouldn't that figure in the experiential part of it? Or
Sure.
why are we?
Yeah. So, but what I'm saying is specifically with respect to belief, maybe you can't always know what you believe in that way, because you can be deceived. I mean, if you right, going back to Freud, if you think, well, you don't think that you believe blah 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 or desire these things, but you actually do. And so the phenomenology, I think, and so I haven't thought about this a whole lot, but insofar as I have, the phenomenology that you'd want to associate with believing is it's the phenomenology of conscious affirmation.
Right.
And that might not be sufficient for actually believing. Right. The proof of believing is in the behavior.
Right.
But
and if you
I'm not committed to that. It just, that seems to me to, that's when I thought about this when I was first thinking about this stuff, and I said, yeah, I don't want to go there. That's complicated already. I want to just focus on the content.
Right.
Yeah. But I do think there's phenomenology of, you can tell whether you're wondering something or not. Yeah, there's a certain way it feels to wonder.
Right.
But there might not be a certain way it feels to believe.
Right. Yeah, I like that distinction, by the way. But so if you're going to sort of agree with that, then isn't when you're going to individuate these states, doesn't it have to be in terms of the attitude and content? Or do you think that when I wonder that P and also doubt that P, that P part has the same phenomenology?
Yes.
And it's just the doubting or wondering, which is adding something extra to it. That's the view.
Yes. I'd want to insist on that.
So you don't think there's any kind of...
It's another limb to go out on, but I've found that, I go out on limbs and I jump up and down and they don't break. People think they do. I'm still here. This is interesting. Maybe this will work.
Yeah. Is this the sense in which you're gonna affirm the kind of compositionality? So wherever that P part appears, it has the same phenomenal feel, whether it's in a belief, I mean, not a belief, but a thought or a judgment or an entertaining.
Yeah, so this is a challenge that was put to me a long time ago by Adam Arico at the University of Arizona. And then was, again, this guy named Galen Berry gave a talk at an APA I was asked to comment on about, won't the phenomenology of a concept change depending on its context, like the way the color of something appears to have can change with its context. And doesn't that wreak havoc with compositionality? And I wrote a little paper on it that I'm incorporating in the book. And I think the answer is that this kind of phenomenology doesn't have those kinds of contrast effects. So if you think that water is wet versus water is cold, it's not a different concept of water. You're thinking the same concept, but in a different context. So,
right.
Word meanings don't change with their context. They don't change their literal meaning with context. So, I would say it just doesn't happen. But, I think it's to some extent an open question, and it would. There's a kind of compositionality that you could still have, right? So you could, sort of factor out the contributions things make to this new thing, and there might be, principles according to which that happens. And that would be a more complicated theory, but I think it could be made to work. I just don't think it happens with the way it happens with others.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea, because you've defended a really kind of strict, narrow content view. I mean, you think that, for instance, when I have the thought, I'm hungry, and you have the thought, I'm hungry, we have the exact same thoughts.
Yes, I do.
Phenomenally, they're indistinguishable, right? So you couldn't tell whether you were me or not at that. I mean, I just by having the thought. Is that
right? So, and it's important to distinguish there that what's going on in your entire conscious experience can be very, very different from what's going on in my entire conscious experience when you think I'm hungry. Or we just focus in on that thought. Yeah, I mean, you and I could have the same qualitatively identical sharp pain, so we can have qualitatively identical thoughts, even if they're part of a different landscape, conscious landscape. And so, right, if you have the intuition that, well, look, I say I'm hungry, you say I'm hungry, we've said different things. Why? Well, because what we say can have different truth values. And when I say it, I'm referring to me, and when you say it, you're referring to you. And so that means there's something in the content, in the what is said.
Mm-hmm.
A student once at the University of Nebraska, I was teaching direct reference, and it seemed to me to be totally right. And she raised her hand and said, "Oh, it seems to me like we're thinking exactly the same thing." And I thought, oh, she doesn't really understand the thing. But then I realized, no, I think she's right, actually. And I'm sort of, I have reasons for wanting that to be right, because if thought contents are phenomenal, then I'm thinking this pen is not phenomenal. So the content of my thought about this pen can't involve the pen, right? Because only phenomenal properties of the right kind can figure in the contents of thoughts, and this isn't a property, and it's not phenomenal, and it's out there. So I started thinking that, well, look, I mean, there's something really basically intuitively attractive about the idea that we've said different things, we've thought different things. But I think, and Kaplan's work is beautiful. I mean, it's great. But I think those intuitions are resistible, and given the proper motivation, you have a good reason for resisting them. I mean, if the motivation is good, your reason for resisting them is good. And so, yeah, a chapter of the book is all about indexical thought, and sort of me taking on Kaplan, which was terrifying. The next chapter is me taking on Kripke, which is also terrifying. But
that's about the names stuff.
What the hell? Mm-hmm.
Is that about names and causal theories of reference?
Yeah, nominal thoughts. Yeah, because they're those semantics. They're not motivated by externalist intuitions, but they end up being externalist about content. And I want to see if one can be a really sort of radical and a Cartesian internalist about content. And what are the costs? What do you have to say about these various things if you want to accommodate kinds of thoughts, if you're this kind of radical internalist about them? I'm not a radical internalist about reference,
right.
But I think that what I don't think actually there are good arguments for bifurcating mental content or linguistic content into not only sense and reference, but then two kinds of content, right? Two kinds of the thing that's expressed by that clauses. I don't.
You're not a content pluralist.
No. And the good old sense and reference, that's all we need.
Yeah.
And so the thing to say about I'm hungry is, well, look, we thought the same thought, only I thought it about me and you thought it about you, and that's why they can have different truth values.
Right.
Right? My hat doesn't become a different hat if I put it on you. right? So when I think that thought, necessarily I refer to myself because of the way the I concept works. And when you think exactly the same thought, it has to refer to you because that's the way the I concept works. So the thoughts can have different truth values, but that doesn't mean they have different meanings any more
Right.
than, if you think about a sentence like whales are mammals, right? And you think about another possible world where you've got a completely different set of whales, the meaning of whales doesn't change because the extension of the term changes. Or you think about you talk about the president of the United States, it refers to one person now, referred to a different person 8 years ago. The term hasn't changed because it's changed its reference. So I don't think you can argue from different reference or different truth value to different meaning. And
Right.
that that the temptation to do that arises from the fact that indexical content, what Kaplan calls character, is so thin, which is one of the reasons indexicals are so useful, right? You don't need to know a lot about the thing to refer to it using this or that or him or her, right? And so there's a temptation to sort of beef up the content of those expressions, but I think that temptation can be resisted, and I have my own reasons for thinking it should be.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess this is another place where we possibly are just gonna come from very different areas, but I do have the intuition that the thoughts are different thoughts. I am kind of an externalist about content, but I like pluralism about content. So I guess that's the difference, one difference. But it seems to me that there's a phenomenal difference in the thoughts. So I wonder what you would say about the idea that part of my thinking that I'm hungry involves me intending to pick myself out, not you, and that's part of the content. That's part of what it's like for me, is that I'm designating myself in a kind of intimate, special way, and that's
right. But that's
not
part
gonna.
of it.
That's not what you have. You have yourself in the center of your experience.
Well, I think our senses of self, just the bare sense of me, is identical for both of us.
Oh, really?
Yeah, everyone has the same sense of self. I mean, there's lots, you fill in your biography and all these other things, but the me-ness is identical. They actually think this has important ethical implications. We're all me. Everyone's a me. And the me is the same for everyone. We're all one. We're all the same,
Cool.
right? And so I think that the bare I concept and the bare awareness of self, that's sort of part of thinking about yourself, is the same for both of us. What's different is that, well, you're over there and I'm over here, separate bodies. But it's conceptually speaking, the thoughts are identical. And this is not part of that, but I also think that the purely non-conceptual sense of self is the same.
So how do I end up thinking about me then, if the thoughts are the same and the self is the same? And what is it that so you're going to deny the essential indexical, or I'm not? I guess I haven't seen that appear anywhere in your work. So now I'm curious about.
Right. So Frege says something like, probably get the quotation wrong, but I can't think about someone else in the same way that I think about myself. Right. I can't think about you, or I can't have the kind of awareness I have of myself of you. Right. But that's a different thesis from saying that we can't have the same concept.
Right.
Directed towards ourselves. So what it's like, I can't think of you the way I think of myself, but you can think of yourself in exactly the same way that I think of myself. Right. So I think Frege's point was the former, and that some people conflate it with the latter, which I think is I think they're different. So the way I'm thinking about myself is just their self-awareness and application of the I concept is exactly the same. I can't think about you that way, but you can think about you that way. And it's the exact same way I'm thinking about myself.
Yeah. I mean, even if you bought that though, why would you not think there's a phenomenal difference in doing it with respect to you versus me doing it with respect to me?
Well, it
So why
depends on what
wouldn't
you
there
mean.
be?
Sorry.
Why wouldn't there be a difference in what it's like for me to think about myself in this way, which is different from the way it is from you to think about yourself in that way?
Depends on how much you're including in the what it's like. Certainly, it's different to be me than it is to be you in important senses. Like, think about our lives and our different tastes and whatever. What makes us different personalities. What I'm saying is that just the sheer self-awareness is the same.
Yeah,
And I'm not talking about, knowing yourself. I'm talking about just your conscious awareness of yourself. I don't know that I have an argument for it. It just seems that that's going to be the same for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea, and I definitely like the ethical implications. It just I can't. It's hard for me to understand why there wouldn't be some kind of phenomenal difference when I think of myself as being hungry.
Well, because maybe when you think
it feels like I'm thinking about me, not you. And when you think about it, it feels like you're thinking about you, not me.
That's right.
And that's a difference in the phenomenology.
No, I don't think that entails a difference in the phenomenology of the thought itself.
Yeah.
So I can't think about you that way. But you can think about you that very same way.
Yeah, it's a challenging view for me to wrap my head around, but I like it. But it's hard for me. I guess I'm too mired in maybe some kind of externalism, but it just feels like that seems to me like one of the most radical things in this view is that these thoughts are literally the same.
Oh yeah, so when someone who's a monolingual speaker of Farsi thinks that democracy is a form of government, the phenomenology is the same. Well, we have to be careful. The monolinguistic speaker of Farsi is probably talking Farsi to herself. I'm not. So our overall experiences are different, right? But the experience of thinking democracy as a form of government is the same. It's not linguistic experience, it's pure thought experience.
Right. The content is
just like
same.
The monolingual Farsi speaker and I could have exactly the same headache, despite of the fact that what's going on in her mind is completely different. What else is going on in her mind is completely different from what else is going on in mine. To say that we have the same headache is to say that we are having the exact qualitatively identical experience, regardless of whether we could ever tell or not. I mean, there's a fact of the matter, I think, about whether we are experiencing the same thing or not.
Yeah, I guess I kind of almost want to resist that too.
Yeah, a lot of people do.
My headache will seem like it's mine and yours will seem like it's yours, and that's a phenomenal difference, I would want to say.
Well, no, my headache will feel like it's mine.
Yeah.
And your headache will feel like it's mine.
But
you're mine.
Yeah, no, I know. It's hard for me. This is a conceptual challenge for me, but I like these sorts of challenges, so I'm not complaining. I'm sorry about that. So I notice we're getting on in time here. Did you lose? Can I still hear you?
I'm still here. I mean, there's occasional glitches because everyone's on Zoom having cocktails and such. Yeah.
It's true. I wanted to ask about the direct reference or the causal reference stuff. So is it part of your view that we don't have singular thoughts, or how do you account for things like singular thoughts?
It is in the sense in which that term is used now, where singular thoughts are somehow object involving.
Yeah.
Or at least, I mean, if you go sort of the Evans-McDowell way, not object involving, but object differentiated. Right. Yeah, I deny that there are. I'm not denying that I can think about you. I'm just denying that the content of my thought is determined by you.
Right.
The person sitting over there.
It's determined by the phenomenal content.
Mm-hmm. And also, so the last chapter of the book is on reference, and I'm working hard on that, and it's hard to figure out what exactly I want to say. But yeah, I mean, you can have thoughts that refer to one and only one person, but I don't think that's, well, maybe I'll change my mind so about this, I don't know, but I don't think that's because of the concepts. I think that's going to be because of the relations that you and I stand in. So I think if I think he's wearing glasses about you, and I think he's wearing glasses about someone else, they're the same thought about different people. What makes yours about you? Well, I can see you when I'm pointing at you, basically. But the concepts are the same. The concept he doesn't determine, obviously, which male I'm referring to.
Right.
But what determines that is who I'm looking at or who I'm pointing at, or the usual sorts of stories. So yeah, I think conceptual content is always general, and that thoughts, as a Fregean intuition, thoughts can only be made of conceptual contents. Right? So Frege says, look, Mont Blanc can't be part of the proposition because propositions are senses, and senses can't have mountains as parts. They can only have senses as parts.
Right.
Right. So being a hard ass about that too, and seeing, well, okay, is that actually workable? And I think it is. And I think
so how do you handle names on this view, and mental names like that in thought?
Yeah, mental names are a challenge, and I only realized fairly late in the game that, oh yeah, I can't say that. So I've got this thing that I call the principle of phenomenal immiscibility, and the idea behind that is that phenomenological types can't mix. Right, so you can have a total state that's got lots of different kinds of phenomenology as components, but you can't, for example, have a sound part of which, no, that's not a sound. Sounds can't have smells as parts of it, right? So, right. So thoughts can't have things that are not concepts as part of them. And that includes both objects out there in the world and non-cognitive experiences. So a big section of one of the chapters, which is an adaptation of something that I published on phenomenal concepts. I think there can't be such things. You can't have a concept. Well, the most extreme version of you can't have a concept, part of which is a percept. You might have some kind of hybrid state that's part concept and part percept, but you can't have a concept whose content isn't conceptual, right? And I also think for other reasons, you can't have concepts that are individual, whose contents are individuated by relations to things that aren't concepts. And so, when I got to the chapter on names, I'm pretty convinced by metalinguistic description theory of names. The kind that was developed by Jerry Katz and Kent Bach, and now has become pretty popular again. The names as predicates, burgeoning literature now. Unfortunately, one of the main contributors to it, Delia Graff, died, so we won't be having her input anymore, which is really awful. But so I think something like that is right. I mean, I have my own version of it that differs from other people's versions. So, but then what do you say? And this is something I wish Jerry Katz were alive so I could argue with him about, because he had a metalinguistic theory of senses, right? So, but a sense can't contain a name, either as a written token or a spoken token or an imagined token, because they aren't senses. They're sounds or ink marks, right? So going on this Fregean purism, senses can't be composed of things that aren't senses. That seems correct to me, and the analogous principle for conceptual states also sounds right to me. And so if you want to have a metalinguistic theory of nominal concepts, well, and you believe in the principle of phenomenal immiscibility, you can't have sounds as parts of thoughts. So if we're thinking of, you're saying the name to yourself, you're having an auditory image of the name, that can't be part of the thought. because it's not conceptual, it's a sound. It's not the right kind of phenomenology. So it was fairly late in the game that I realized, oh yeah, now what? I mean, it's something that should have been obvious from the beginning, but it wasn't. So I sort of changed the view to what I call paratactic theory of nominal concepts. And the thoughts that we express by uttering proper names are actually about proper names. And so what you have, the thought content is, so what I think the meaning of a proper name like Richard is a bearer of Richard, right? A bearer, because Richard has many bearers.
Right.
And so given this other principle that I like, that I'm committed to, what I need to say is, well, the nominal concept, there's only one nominal concept, and it is a bearer of this name, where the mental demonstrative picks out a token of the name. So it's, you talk about people using their name, you think about people using their names in part by thinking about their names. And where thinking about their names involves having a thought about a token, some kind of mental or physical inscription of the name. And I think, Jerry Katz should have said that about linguistic sense. Maybe he did somewhere, but I've spent a lot of time talking to him, I don't remember him.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I like the meta-linguistic theory of names too, but I think of it as a as an account of the semantic or linguistic meaning of a name, not part of the thought content.
Well,
so I think it's interesting to see how you're working out in terms of thought, because
I think linguistic content is derived from thought content. It's a fairly traditional view, and not the other way around. And that it's not that thought is language-like; it's language is thought-like. That's where the structures come from. So yeah, this is the conceptual analog of that theory.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So it does. I mean, how do the truth conditions for these thoughts get worked out? So when you say Richard's wearing glasses, so when you have that thought, according to as far as I understand the view, you're having a thought about some linguistic token, or some item like the name Richard, like maybe the one in the email, one more brown or whatever. But you're not having a thought about me, or how does it get attached to me, or how do the truth conditions center on me eventually?
So there's other thoughts by which I can triangulate you, and I think ultimately it comes down to acquaintance with you. But so if I say, Richard's wearing glasses, the content of that thought is a bearer of this name, Richard, is wearing glasses. Okay, which one? Well, let me tell you which one. Him. Or Richard Brown, who hosts Consciousness Live, or I find some other way of zeroing in on you. And I have to have that for myself if I want to be thinking about someone in particular. So I said, well, Richard wearing glasses, and someone said, who are you talking about? And I say, I don't know. Okay, something's gone wrong here. You have to have someone in mind. You don't have them in mind by having their name in mind, right? So you have to have some other way of triangulating to get to identify for yourself the person you mean to be talking about, and then you can communicate that to others.
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting view. It doesn't feel that way when we think about people. So it seems like the phenomenology of having a thought, like David's wearing glasses or Richard's wearing glasses. Do you think introspectively that it feels like you're having that thought in virtue of via a token of a linguistic item? I don't see.
Well, it's kind of hard to tell, because especially if you're someone like me who has to talk to think, or at least to think, anything beyond the cat is on the mat, or very simple thoughts. I mean, I think we probably are dependent on language, and there's some thoughts that we can't think without the help of language, because we need an enduring scaffold to hang the concepts on, to keep them together. We can't keep them in our mind. So, again, maybe we're really not that great at thinking. So it's hard to tell. But if you adopt the metalinguistic theory of the meaning, linguistic meaning of names, and I think there are very good reasons to do that.
Yeah, me too.
And you think that linguistic meaning is derived from conceptual content, then this is what you need to say about, now, is it possible that an empirical psychologist come along and say, yeah, that's really not what's going on in people's minds? Sure, and then I'd say, okay, I'll try something else. That didn't work.
Yeah, but I like the spirit of seeing how far you can get out on the branch before it breaks.
And it hasn't broken yet, at least
Yeah, exactly.
according to me. I mean,
Yeah,
other
exactly.
people think I haven't noticed that I'm lying on the ground with broken legs.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I guess part of what I was asking that for was because it just seems to me introspectively that there's something direct about thinking via a name, which I feel like it's probably the source of a lot of Millian and Kripke ideas, or in that camp, is that it doesn't seem like we have to think about these people through a description. There's a kind of
But
more
we are. It's a metalinguistic description. You're thinking of them.
But so I would be happy to say that's what you say about the sentence in English, Richard is wearing glasses. But I'm not happy to say that about the thought, Richard is wearing glasses. To me, it seems that they're different in exactly this way, that one you can make sense of as a predicate, and the other one has this more direct relationship. Like the phenomenology is somehow is different.
Go ahead, sorry.
Oh no, that was it. That was the other thought.
Yeah. So I think what I would want to say about that is that there is a tendency, especially with concepts and terms like names and indexicals, because their conceptual content is so thin. There's a tendency to try to load a bunch of stuff into those concepts so they'll pick out the right person. And I think you don't have to do that. You can have all of that as sort of background information, and that targets your thought, right? But so, someone's got to target the gun, but it's the gun that's shooting. It's not the surrounding, the surrounds of it. So here's an example I like. Suppose you get kidnapped and you're taken to a place, right, in a car with a hood over your head. You can't see anything. You get into the room, and hood's taken off, and you open your eyes, and it's pitch black. You really have no idea where you are. You think you're inside, but maybe you're not even inside. And you think to yourself, I don't like it here. Okay, now let's say your eyes start to adjust to the dark, and you start to sort of make out some shapes. Okay, I'm inside, and this is a concrete floor. And you think again, yeah, I still don't like it here. Are you thinking a different thought? I say no. And they'll say, they come in and turn on the light. Now you can see it's a torture chamber or someone's living room or whatever. Yeah, well, I really don't like it here now. Has your thought, I don't like it here, changed its content? I don't see why we have to say that. Your take on what here is like, your take on what the place you're at is different, right? You've got a lot more information about the place, but you don't have to stuff that into the concept here. It's part of other thoughts that you're having about the place that you are. And so, Jerry Katz used to complain about what he called Freudian intentionalism, where the determination of a referent is built in, is the defining characteristic of a sense. And he said, no, sense determines sense properties and relations, something else determines reference. I really agreed with him on that, and this is sort of the conceptual version of that way of thinking about content internal to expression or a thought and reference. It doesn't have to be that the sense of a term determines all by itself its reference, right? Maybe every term is to some extent indexical in that way. You need some kind of context. Maybe not every term, but you need context in order to determine which one of those things that meets the description you're talking about.
Yeah.
You don't have to put that thing in the thought in order to be thinking about that individual.
So I mean, it's kind of interesting. I mean, I like the view, and I think it's good that you're developing it, because having these kinds of careful, worked out versions of this view, I think, is going to help us. Whether you agree with it or not, I think it's really useful exercise. But I do worry a little bit about the introspective.
Not a useful exercise, Richard. It's my life.
Exactly. It's a useful life. It's a
Thank you.
It's a worthwhile life. Exactly. I wasn't trying to diminish that. But I do worry about the introspective or the first person methodology a little bit here. And this touches back on something we were talking about before with the cognitive phenomena or conceptual phenomenology, because people come to different views. Like my interpretation of the phenomenal, what I'm acquainted with, is slightly different than what you're saying. And then you have an argument saying, well, maybe you're confusing this part of it, the background, with the thing that's actually just the concepts. And so I think, well, gee, so I have to think about that. But how do we go past these sorts of methodological, stalemates when
Yep.
we were both appealing to introspection and yet we're coming up with different accounts?
So two ways. One, you can't expect that introspection will reveal everything just like that. I mean, sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't. You have to clear away that you're talking to yourself a little bit and make distinctions and think about it. And I was talking to Eric Schwitzgebel about this, and he suggested that, the original introspectionist psychologists would do it in a bar or something. Well, those are not controlled conditions, right? They say, yeah, that's bad. We shouldn't do it that way. But there's also, so take, for example, the experience of shape constancy, right? So the Frisbee's flying through the air. Does it really look round the whole time? Constancy is phenomenally manifest, and other people say no, that's a matter of what you believe about it.
Right.
And then you get people shouting at each other, and you don't get anywhere. Okay, well, let's call a psychologist. I mean, if there are some clever maybe David Eagleman, right? Some really clever psychologists could design an experiment to determine which of you is right. So, for example, if it is just a matter of belief, and that belief is that things don't change their shape just because they're moving. Okay, now introduce a scenario where you say all bets are off. This might be a world in which things do change their shape when they're moving. Now what do you experience? And if the shape constancy goes away, well, that's evidence that it was a matter. It wasn't something that was phenomenally manifest visually. It was phenomenally manifest cognitively, conceptually.
Right.
That's my completely amateur or back of a napkin suggestion, but it seems to me that, yeah, look, psychologists rely on introspection all the time, right? So you go, okay, press the button when you see this. Well, how do I know when I see this? I'll know. I'll experience it. That's introspection. But they're disciplined about it, and when there's disagreement or unclarity, say, okay, well, let's design a new experiment to try to tease those things apart. And maybe they can, and they can answer the question. And maybe they can't right away, or maybe never. So we say, yeah, we don't know the answer to that question. Right. So I'm not saying that I wouldn't want to say that introspection is always infallible, or that we're omniscient about ourselves. None of those traditional things about introspection. But if we couldn't do it at all, then psychology would be impossible. This is sort of kind of experimental psychology would be impossible. And we can enlist, really clever psychologists if we have. So this was a debate actually that Charles Seward told me about at one of the Spawn conferences, I think it was 2005, about shape constancy, whether it's phenomenally manifest or not. And I said, well, let's go get a psychologist to design an experiment. We ought to be able to tell from people's reactions, which are introspectively in a controlled situation, and we might get an empirical help in getting an answer.
Yeah,
who's right.
I think one of the cool things about this of your work is that if you take it seriously, then the way we do linguistics and the way we do psychology, what's going to have to take account of this and start investigating it. So I would like to see some kinds of experiments in this vein, come out. I don't think. I mean, honestly, probably. I think you made this point in somewhere in your one of your papers that when the linguists are asking people to make these judgments about what's grammatical, they're already relying on cognitive phenomenology or conceptual phenomenology. That those are conscious experiences. They're not really taken as such. There's, you know, there's this the view that these things are just, you know, boxology things, and is widespread. But it's nice to see that kind of changing, and it's nice to see serious people like you taking these ideas and seeing how far you can get with them. So I think that's really cool. We're running out of time here, and I can't keep you forever, and already I probably kept you too long.
Well, you have,
but
you
I
have toddlers waiting for you too, right?
Yeah, well, I think they've probably stopped waiting at this point. I did. I mean, maybe I'm gonna have to ask you to come back at some other point. We could talk about this more fully, because
I'm happy to talk
do
about
want
myself, Richard, for
Yeah,
as long as you can stand it.
cool. I do want to ask you about introspection, because you were bringing it up just now. We were talking about it. So introspection, on your view, is the same as a knowing, acquaintance knowing, or is that knowing by acquaintance? Is that where the introspection part comes in, or?
Well, my view about introspection is that, and I'm very influenced by Dretske here, though I differ from him, that simply having a conscious experience is a form of introspection, because you're aware of your experience when you're having it, right? So that's what Dretske would call non-epistemic, or I would call, following Dretske, non-epistemic introspection. And then there's introspection that involves thinking about your experience, or maybe attending to various aspects of your experience, or various different parts of the visual field, and forming beliefs about it, right? So that's epistemic introspection. So the way this relates to acquaintance is that I think knowing what it's like, knowledge, is experiential knowledge. So to know what something is like is to experience it. And no concepts need be applied to this. So when Mary leaves the black and white room, suppose she enters, Martina Nita Rumlin has this for Mariana, and she walks into this room with all these colored, brightly painted things, but no recognizable objects.
Right.
I call that the Technicolor vestibule. Right. So on her way out, she walks through the Technicolor vestibule, and she knows what red looks like, and what blue looks like, and what yellow looks like. She doesn't know that it's red that looks like that, or blue that looks like that, but she knows what the colors look like. Why? Because she's experiencing them. She's experiencing what they look like, and that counts as a kind of knowledge. And so I want to distinguish three things, and I'm not completely clear about how this maps onto Russell's terminology, but there's what I call acquaintance knowledge, which Earl Coney, in a really wonderful and I think underread paper from '94, calls phenomenal knowledge, of simply having the experience is knowing what it's like. Right. So do you know what pineapple tastes like? Well, have you tasted it? And can you remember what it tastes like? Or you don't? Okay, I'm now going to give you the knowledge of what pineapple tastes like. And I put a piece in your mouth. Now you know. Right? My dogs know what pineapple tastes like. They're smart, but they're not terribly conceptually sophisticated. I don't know if they have thoughts. So, and then there's what I would call knowledge by acquaintance, where you think about your experience and apply concepts to it. Right? And what I want to say, and this is also what Earl Coney says, is that when Mary leaves the room, she may gain knowledge by acquaintance, if she can apply concepts to it, but she also just gains phenomenal knowledge of what it's like. And knowing what it's like is simply experiencing it, whatever it is, what it's like to blank, just experiencing that. And insofar as you can remember it or recreate it, you will continue to know what it's like. And here's another limb I've gone out on. This one's a little, when she's not experiencing it or imagining it, she doesn't know what it's like.
Knowing what it's sense. She knows, but she knows what it's like in the other sense, though, right?
I would say in the sense that we want for knowing what it's like. knowing what it's like is experiencing. So we could say, well, if she's capable of imagining it, she's not right now. I think we should say, well, right now she doesn't know what it's like, but she can know if she imagines it. Just like you can know what it's like if you've forgotten what pineapple tastes like and put it in your mouth. So I think knowing what it's like is non-conceptual, non-propositional acquaintance. What Coney calls phenomenal knowledge. It's not conceptual, it's not propositional.
And so, yeah, I mean, this connecting back to the phenomenal concepts thing we were talking about earlier. So I know the argument that you have that you know, these things can't combine in this way. But what is the reason for thinking that the experience itself can't acquire a functional role, which we would associate with something like thinking? So that, you know, say you bring the experience up and you say pineapple tastes like, and there's the experience.
Right. So you can absolutely do that. But what you're doing is you're not thinking with the experiences, you're thinking about them. Right. That experience.
But is that a real
become...
distinction? I mean, what's the distinction? Because it's a part. I mean, why not say that has acquired? It is a concept now. It's a concept because it's playing this role.
I suppose you could say that, but I'm committed to not saying it. And so, I mean, I also think there's some really good intuitive reasons for thinking it can't become a concept. But the theoretical reason is, you know, as I've said, that this is a particular kind of phenomenology and they don't mix in the relevant sense. I mean, they mix in the way that oil and water do if you put them in a jar and shake them up, but you're not having oil molecules or whatever become part of water molecules. They're still separate.
Right.
So they're immiscible, even though you can sort of mix them but anyway, so but I think the intuitive reason is that concepts have to be thinkable, and colors and shapes and sounds aren't thinkable. You can't think them. You think thoughts.
What's the argument that you can't
sounds.
think them?
The argument is that just it's linguistically out. I mean, so look, some continental philosophers talk about thinking sexuality, but I think that's if they really mean that literally, they're saying something that doesn't make any sense at all. You can't think. All you can think about it. You can't think it. Why? Because it's not a thought. It's like saying saying you can think a sound is like saying you could smell a sound. No, you can't. These are completely different kinds of things, and their mode of their experiential modes are completely different and incompatible. But that doesn't mean that you can't have an image before your mind. Well, you can't, but one can have an image before their mind and think about it, right? And that image might play some functional role, but that doesn't make it a concept. Why? Well, in my view, it's because concepts are a very specific, proprietary kind of experience. So think of it this way. Yeah, you can think about these things in other ways, but one of the things I want to do, I mean, besides trying to convince people that this is the right way to look at things, okay, I want to be really strict about this. I want to go all out, uncompromising. And phenomenal intentionality without compromises, cutting targets. Okay, let's see, we do that. What follows from that? What do we have to say? What do we need to give up? Right. What side do we have to take with various debates? And so you might say, well, look, I could have a theory on which a percept or an image kind of plays the role of a concept. And I would say, yeah, but that's not a theory on which concepts are what I said they are. Right. So yeah, there are other ways to understand these things, but I feel like this view, the conceptual phenomenology view, forces you to think a different way about them. Right. Consistent with the basic premise. This is the way you have to treat these things. And then, you hope it's not too outlandish. Way you it's not, yeah, you have to accept this completely ridiculous thing yeah, that would be a reason to give up the theory, I think.
Yeah,
But
no,
I haven't.
I don't think that's the case.
I've certainly encountered things that kind of worry me. And do I really? So Colin McGinn once said when he was writing his Mysterianism paper, I was taking a class with him at CUNY, and I was asking him about it. And he said, "Yeah, sometimes I wake in the middle of the night and fall sweat thinking no." And I kind of feel that way sometimes too. I wake up and I say, "Oh no, really?" And then I convince myself again that I'm right about it. But so yeah, it's the way I'm thinking of the project is just drawing out the consequences of this. If we accept this, and I think you should, here are the reasons to accept it. It's going to change a lot of the way we think about things.
Right.
And some of those ways might be just undigestible to some people. They say, "Yeah, I'll take this over your theory." And I
But
say,
it's good
"Okay,
to have
well
it
now
worked
you have
out either way.
Sorry.
I said it's good to have it worked out for exactly those kinds of purposes.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be working it out if I didn't, really think it's right.
Right.
I have those moments of doubt, dark nights of the soul, and then I go through my arguments again. I think, no, I can't see anything wrong with this argument. I've entertained a lot of objections to them, talked to a lot of people, and no one has convinced me that that's wrong. So, what's the whole picture that emerges from this way of thinking about thought and thought contents? And it's very, very different from what I was taught to believe in graduate school.
Absolutely, yeah. So not only are you going to go against like phenomenal concepts, but also like what Dave Chalmers calls direct phenomenal concepts, right? Where you can just grab the experience itself and be read like this.
Yeah, you can do that, but I would say that's not a concept.
Yeah.
And maybe that doesn't matter. Then maybe Dave would say, fine, okay, whatever. But you can do this. I say, yeah, just don't call it a concept because it isn't a concept. And Dave might say, okay, whatever. I don't care. Call it what you like. But
as long as you can do it, I think that's what's important for him.
Yeah, I certainly think you can experience things and you can think about them and you can hold them in your attention. I wouldn't want to deny any of that. And if my view implied that you had to give that up, I'd think, yeah, something's gone really badly wrong here. But what I want to challenge is in the phenomenal concept strategy against Armstrong, I don't think there can be such things. And I think that all of the concepts that Mary can entertain after she leaves the room, she already had when she was in the room. She doesn't gain any new concepts. She gains new experiences. She doesn't gain new concepts. So she could think, this is what red looks like, have that thought in the black and white room, maybe not truly, right? Because there isn't anything red in the room, but she can certainly think the thought. She doesn't become capable of thinking things when she's out of the room that she wasn't capable of. Even like, oh, that's such a pretty color. She might say that when she leaves the room. She could have thought that in the room. There's no new concepts that she acquires when she leaves. What she acquires is new experiences.
That's another part of the view that I was troubled by, because I think you say even at some point that even a blind person has the same concept of red as I do or you do. Even if they've never seen any colors at all, they still have the same concept of red. I found that very counterintuitive. I mean, I had to think about it for a long time. First of all, I think you use puce a lot, which I had to Google puce to find out what it was. It's a horrible color, by the way. So
I'm sorry, I was just being an asshole.
Yeah, well, I didn't know purplish brown. Like, what the?
This is going to make them run to their dictionaries.
It did actually. But I mean, so I found that very surprising that you went so far as to say that we have the same concepts. It's a basic, it's going back to empiricism for a long time, that the meaningfulness of the concept red comes from the experiential component of it, and you're just straight up denying that. So I found that.
Yeah. So here's the story. Can you hold on a minute? I need to get a little water because I'm drying out.
Oh yeah, sorry.
show everyone my t-shirt by the genius Ross Chast. So when I was a sophomore, I had a hallmate, woman who lived on the same hall, who was born without a sense of smell. And when I found this out, I was really, I mean, I wasn't really into philosophy, you know, as a career yet. I wanted to be a musician, but I was absolutely fascinated by it. And she put up with me for a while, asking her questions. And here's what she knew. She knew that smell was a kind of, there was a sensory modality, and that there was a kind of experience associated with smell. And that she had learned that it has a lot to do with why people are so much more enthusiastic about food than she is. And I thought to myself later, when thinking back on this example, I said, well, what would someone ask me? What would I tell someone who asked me what it was like to smell something, or what the smell of pineapple is? Or if someone asked me, well, what is olfactory experience like? I tell them the same thing that she told me. And I can smell things. So my understanding, conceptual understanding what smell is the same as hers. Maybe some, maybe a little star in that, but it's centrally the same as hers. She knows what I know, and she knows, is that smell is a sensory modality. There's a particular kind of experience associated with it. It has to do with, the enjoyment of food, blah, blah, blah. She knew all those things. So conceptually, she knows what smell is. What she doesn't know is what it's like to smell, but I want to argue that's not conceptual knowledge.
Yeah.
I would give the same explanation if you asked me what smell is. If I couldn't, put something under your nose and say, that's what it is. If she asked me, okay, well, you tell me what smell is. I'd say, well, I can't really tell you any more than you've already told me. I have the same intellectual grasp on smell as you do, the same conceptual grasp on smell as you do. But I also have the experience. But having the experiences doesn't change what concepts I have.
So why, I mean, because my intuition would be like that her talking about smell is more like that person from before, the child talking about the causal nexus. She's saying she's not really thinking the same thoughts as you because she lacks the experience. So why,
Look, she knows what experience is. She has that concept, and maybe she has it from her own experience. And she knows that, smell has something to do with what's in it. She might be a super scientist, right? She might become a world expert on olfactory experience, right? The Newton Nordby of the nose, but still not know what it's like
right.
to smell something. But she has acquired all of the scientific understanding, all the conceptual understanding that she could acquire. And I would think that, and I couldn't do any better than that by way of telling someone what it's like, or communicating the concept of smell. I mean, I can communicate the concept of smell as a sensory modality, say, involving the nose and blah, 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 and all that stuff. But none of that, just like with Mary, none of that is going to get her to understand what it's like to smell something.
Right.
And so I would say if she one day woke up and, oh, I can smell. This is weird. Never experienced anything like this before. She wouldn't gain any new concepts. And that her understanding, her conceptual understanding of what smell is, wouldn't change. And it's the same as mine, because I couldn't say any more than she could about what smell is.
Do you think that maybe there's room here to say that even if you allow that she wouldn't gain any new concepts, that the concepts would change? Sort of like if you don't know that water is H2O and then you come to find out that, and then if you go to chemistry and become a chemist, then your understanding of H2O deepens. Isn't there a sense in which the concept has undergone some change? It's been enriched in a way it wasn't before.
So I want to say no. I want to say she might know sorry, I'm not remembering for some reason the exact details of what you just said, but she might learn things, right? Her range of experiences might increase, right? But it's like being kidnapped and being in the room. Your concept of
Right.
here doesn't change. Your knowledge of its referent changes, but the concept itself doesn't change. Right now, I have tendentious reasons for wanting to say that, but I also think it intuitively makes a lot of sense to me. Why you have a different concept of here? Because I can now see things. No, I have a different experience of here. I have more knowledge about what here is like, but I don't have an enriched here concept. It's the same one I always had. And so I would say that you know, I'm thinking, well, I got the same concept of smell as this person who can't smell at all. And my concept of smell, look, I can already smell. And I think I have the same concept that she does. So I don't think her concept would change if she was suddenly able to smell. Because the concept of, well, what sort of cognitive conceptual knowledge do you have about smell? And I think, yeah, I'd say pretty much what she said. And if I suddenly start having olfactory experiences that I didn't have before, or when I turn my attention to my olfactory experiences, I'm not turning my attention to different concepts. My appreciation of smell changes.
Right.
Oh, so this is what it's like to smell. I always knew what smell was, but I didn't know what it was like to experience it. And that's definitely an enrichment of your mind and your knowledge, but it's not a conceptual enrichment, on my view.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Okay, I mean, I could talk with you all night, but I guess I gotta wrap this up at this point with regret. But I
Well,
would
Richard,
also
this was
wanna,
really great. And I really appreciate the work you've done, reading my stuff. I really had a wonderful time. I really appreciate it.
well, thank you. And I want to say I appreciate you writing it because I had a great time reading it. And honestly, I want to say that your work is, in my opinion, represents the best of philosophy. It's challenging, it's technical, it's well thought out, it's thought provoking and interesting. And that's a rare combination. So
Well, thank you very
truly,
much. Thank you very much. I try to be interesting and clear and thought provoking. So that's
I think
really
it works.
wonderful to hear. Thank you very much. It
Yeah.
was great
And
to
my
see you. It's been too long.
I know exactly. One of these days when we're allowed outside again, I'll make it to California.
Yeah.
But
Next
I
time I come
usually
to
want
New
to
York
ask
when
that.
we're allowed outside.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
My final question usually is if there's anything that hasn't come up that you wished had come up, and the answer can be no, but just in case.
Well, there's some things I was afraid would come up that didn't, and I'm happy about that because they're thorny questions, the answers to which I have but can't remember. So I was sort of going through my book last night. Where do I have? Maybe I was going to ask this question. God, what did I say about that? You didn't ask any of those. So yeah, no, I'm great.
Cool. Well, once again, I'm gonna have to have you on some other day because I have about 1,000 other things. Some of them may be those thorny ones, but for now, let's say I do, and just hang out for a second. I'll say bye off air. But thanks again,
Okay.
David. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Richard.
That was a great conversation.